The auction hall smelled like burned oil and old metal. It floated in orbit above Draven 4, a small, ugly moon at the edge of what most people called known space. The station was run by the Vora Consortium, a group of alien traders who bought broken things and sold them to whoever had credits. They did not care about history. They did not care about stories. They cared about weight, and price, and moving goods fast. Cal Rourke stood near the back of the main floor with his hands in his jacket pockets. He was 29 years old, originally from a small town in Ohio, and he had exactly 11,000 credits to his name. That was everything. He had sold his cargo shuttle's secondary engine last month to make rent on his docking berth. He had skipped meals twice that week. 11,000 credits was not much at an auction like this, and he knew it. But he had come anyway. The hall was full of buyers. Most of them were not human. The Ketheri traders stood in a cluster near the front, their gray-blue skin catching the light from the overhead panels. A few Soren merchants talked quietly among themselves, tapping notes into their wrist devices. There were two humans besides Cal, a middle-aged woman from a mining company, and an older man who kept looking at his communication device instead of the lots being sold. Neither of them seemed interested in anything specific. They were there to browse. Cal was not there to browse. He had a photograph. It was old, pulled from a declassified military file he found 3 years ago while doing research for a salvage job that had nothing to do with warships. The file was labeled Routine Decommission Records, but someone had made a small mistake when archiving it. A single image had ended up in the wrong folder. It showed the side profile of a warship, taken from a distance, slightly blurred, with one corner damaged. There were no markings visible. The file reference attached to the image read Iron Covenant, and below that, 2 contradictory status codes, destroyed in action, and vessel location unknown. Both at the same time. On the same official record. Cal had spent 3 years thinking about that. He had read every public file on the First Contact war he could find. The war had lasted 7 years and ended 40 years before he was born. 4 million human lives lost. A fragile peace signed on a station not very different from this one. The Iron Covenant was listed in the records as a heavy support vessel, crew of 61, last confirmed position near the Ardal system. After that, nothing. 2 different departments had filed 2 different reports, and no one had ever publicly explained the contradiction. Most people who knew about it assumed it was a paperwork error from a chaotic war. Cal did not think so. He had memorized the silhouette in that photograph. The particular angle of the forward hull. The way the secondary drive housings curved inward near the rear section. It was not a common design, specific to a short run of vessels built at the orbital yards above Earth between 2289 and 2301. He had looked at that image so many times he could close his eyes and draw it from memory. Lot 47 came up just after midday. 2 Vora workers dragged it into the display area on magnetic clamps. It was large, larger than anything else sold that day, and it was in terrible condition. The outer hull was scorched black in sections. One of the forward panels was missing entirely. There were stress fractures running along the port side that had been partially filled with gray compound, probably to stop atmospheric leakage during transport. It looked like something pulled out of a battlefield and left in a field for a generation. The auctioneer, a tall Vora with a flat, wide face, described it in 4 sentences. Unknown make. Unknown registry. Approximately 70 years old based on alloy composition. Reserve price, 9,000 credits, sold as scrap weight. The crowd was not interested. A few people looked. No one moved toward the bidding terminal. The Ketheri traders glanced at it and turned away. The Soren merchants did not even turn their heads. Cal looked at the curve of the rear drive housings. He walked to the bidding terminal and placed 11,000 credits. No one raised it. The room moved on. The auctioneer confirmed the sale in a flat, bored voice and called Lot 48. Cal stood at the terminal for a moment after the confirmation screen went dark. His hands were steady. His chest was not. He had just spent everything he had on a ruined warship that the rest of the room considered garbage, based on a blurry photograph and 3 years of late-night reading. He walked toward the exit bay. A voice stopped him near the door. "You overpaid," said the voice. Cal turned. The speaker was a Ketheri, not one of the cluster from the front of the room, but a lone trader who had been standing near the side wall. His name tag read Sieve in both Ketheri script and standard human letters. He was shorter than most of his kind, and he looked at Cal with an expression that was hard to read. 9,000 was the reserve, Cal said. I paid 11. I know what you paid, Steve said. He glanced toward the display area where workers were already reclamping the ship for transport. Some old things, he said slowly, are better left as scrap. Cal watched him for a moment. Steve did not say anything else. He turned and walked in the other direction. Cal stood in the exit bay and thought about those words for a long time. It was not a threat, exactly. It was not a warning, exactly. It was the kind of sentence that meant someone knew something they were not saying out loud. He pulled up his communication device and sent a message to the one person he trusted with anything complicated. The message read, Lena. I need you. Bring your tools. Do not ask questions yet. Then he went to find his ship. The Iron Covenant was docked in berth 7 of a rented bay on Draven 4's orbital ring. Cal had paid for 3 days. He was not sure 3 days would be enough for anything, but it was what he could afford after spending his last credits at the auction. He stood in front of the access hatch for almost 10 minutes before he tried to open it. The hatch was old. The locking mechanism was a model he recognized from pictures, not from experience. Ships like this were built before he was born. He used a manual override tool from his kit, and after a few minutes of careful work, the hatch gave a low sound and opened inward. The air that came out was stale but not bad. Old, the way a closed room smells old, not like rot, not like damage. Like something that had been sealed for a very long time and kept clean by habit alone. Cal went in. The interior was dark but not completely dark. Along the base of the main corridor, small strip lights glowed a pale amber color. They were dim. But they were on. Cal stood still and looked at them. A ship abandoned for 70 years had no reason to have any lights at all. Power cells did not last that long under normal circumstances. He walked slowly down the corridor. The floor was dusty but the structure was solid. No leaks. No warping from pressure damage. Someone, or something, had maintained the hull's integrity from the inside all this time. He found the bridge on the second level. It was small by modern standards, designed for a crew of 6 at the main stations. The screens were dark except for one, a secondary display panel on the left side of the room, which showed a single line of text in standard human script. The text read, System active. Waiting for authorized personnel. Cal sat down in the nearest chair. He took out his handheld device, connected it to the ship's data port with a cable from his kit, and began a basic interface request. The screen changed. Good morning, it said. Then, after a short pause, or good evening. I am not certain of the current station time. Cal stared at the screen. He typed slowly. Who are you? The response came without delay. My designation is Meridian. I am the onboard system for this vessel. I manage navigation, life support, ship records, and crew communications. How can I help you? Cal typed, what ship is this? The response, this is the Iron Covenant, Earth Unified Fleet Registration Number EUF, 1142-C, Commission 2301, assigned to the 7th Fleet Support Division. He sat back in the chair. He had known. He had been almost certain from the moment he saw the ship at the auction. But seeing the name typed out in plain text on that dim screen, in a ship that had been missing for 70 years, made his hands feel strange. He typed, what is your current status? Meridian answered clearly and without drama. She had been in reduced operation mode since what she described as the final engagement. She did not call it a battle. She did not call it a disaster. She used the words final engagement the way a technical report uses words, precise, without decoration. Her core power cell had maintained a low charge by running only essential systems. She had managed internal temperature, hull integrity, and her own memory systems. Everything else had been offline or minimal for the duration of the wait. Cal typed, how long have you been waiting? There was a pause. Then, based on accumulated system cycles and comparison with my last confirmed stardate, approximately 71 years, 4 months, and some days. My long-range timekeeping has some drift. I apologize for the imprecision. Cal read that 3 times. He heard boots on the access ladder behind him. He did not turn around because he already knew who it was. Lena Marsh stepped onto the bridge and stopped. She was 34 years old, with short dark hair and the kind of expression that meant she was already calculating what something would cost to fix before she had looked at it properly. She had a large tool bag over one shoulder and a smaller bag in her other hand, which meant she had packed for serious work without knowing what the work actually was. She looked at the room. She looked at the lit screen. She looked at Cal. "You're going to tell me this is a 70-year-old warship," she said. 71, Cal said. Lena set down her bags. She walked to the screen and read it. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she pulled up a chair and sat down next to Cal and looked at the data port connection. "It's talking to you," she said. "Her name is Meridian." Lena was quiet again. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out her own connection cable and asked Cal to move over slightly. She typed, "Meridian, can you show us the crew manifest?" The screen filled with names. 61 of them. Name, rank, department, home city. The list was clean and complete, formatted exactly the way military records were formatted, no different from any other official document, except that every person on it had been missing for over 7 decades and none of them had ever come home. Lena read down the list slowly. Cal watched her face. She stopped at one entry near the middle. She did not say which name it was. She just looked at it for a moment and then looked away. "Are there personal recordings?" Cal asked the screen. Meridian answered, "Yes. There are 43 personal message recordings, 11 mission logs, 1 final command report, and 1 incomplete crew log. All have been preserved in full." "Incomplete," Lena said quietly. Meridian said, "The final crew log ends mid-sentence." The recording was interrupted and not resumed. Neither Cal nor Lena said anything after that. They sat in the dim amber light of a ship that had waited in silence for longer than either of them had been alive, and they began to listen. The first recording was from a man named Pete Cole, a systems engineer from Georgia, 26 years old at the time of the recording. He spoke in a calm, ordinary voice, the way people speak when they believe they will see the person they are talking to very soon. He talked about his sister's new apartment, a sports result he had just heard, and something funny the cook had said at dinner. He did not know he was making his last recording. By the third recording, Lena had stopped making notes in her repair log. By the sixth, Cal had stopped looking at the screen. They simply sat and listened in the quiet of a ship that had kept these voices perfectly intact for 71 years, waiting for the day when someone would finally come and hear them. Lena worked on the ship's systems through the night. She was good at her job, one of the best independent engineers Cal had ever worked with, and she moved with her head down and her hands busy, not talking much, which was how she worked when something had gotten deep under her skin. Cal did not sleep. He sat at the bridge screen and went further into the data core. Meridian guided him without being asked. She would say things like, "This section connects to the engagement record," or, "You may find the command files relevant here." She did not push. She did not explain why she was pointing him in a particular direction. She answered what he asked and offered what she thought would help. It was a calm, steady kind of conversation, and Cal found himself talking to her the way he talked to people he had known for a long time. He started with the mission logs. They were standard, position reports, supply records, crew health entries, routine notes that could have come from any ship in any fleet. Nothing unusual until the final weeks before the disappearance. Then the tone of the entries changed. They became shorter. Some were marked restricted, internal only, do not transmit. Cal asked Meridian if those files were accessible. She said, "Yes. All files are accessible to you. I have no standing orders to restrict anything. My last orders were received 71 years ago." Cal opened the restricted files. He read for 4 hours without stopping. By the time Lena came back to the bridge with 2 cups of heated water and whatever protein packets she had found in her bag, Cal was sitting very still with both hands flat on the console. He had the expression of someone who has just understood something large and wished very much that he had not. Lena set a cup next to him and looked at the screen. She read the first page of what was open. Then she pulled her chair close and read the next page, and the one after that. She did not speak until she had read everything Cal had open on the display. "Tell me I'm reading this wrong," she said. Cal said nothing. The files were clear. Not coded, not scrambled, just quietly filed under restricted and left there, probably because whoever made the decision to bury the ship never imagined it would surface again. The Iron Covenant had been on a standard patrol near the Ardal system when it intercepted a transmission that was not meant for human eyes. The transmission was between a Kethari command vessel and a civilian communications relay. It was in Kethari military code, but the Iron Covenant system had a decryption set 1 generation newer than what the Kethari expected human ships to carry. The transmission described the event that started the First Contact War. Everyone knew the official story. A human survey ship had crossed into Kethari space, ignored warnings, and opened fire on a Kethari patrol vessel. The Kethari responded with force. 7 years of war followed. 4 million humans died. What the Iron Covenant's intercepted transmission described was something entirely different. The survey ship had not crossed the border on its own. It had been guided there by a falsified navigation update pushed to its autopilot from an outside source. The ship's crew had no idea they were in the wrong position. The initial Kethari response, the one that started everything, had been planned well in advance. The provocation was not an accident and not a misunderstanding. It was arranged deliberately. The Iron Covenant had sent a compressed copy of the intercepted transmission to Fleet Command. 48 hours later, a response came back, not a broad fleet response, but a direct private message on a secure channel from a senior officer named in the files as Admiral Lou Grant. The message told the ship's captain to maintain radio silence and hold position. Extraction vessels were being sent. The extraction vessels never came. Instead, there were 2 more short private transmissions from command. Then silence. The ship's log showed the captain, a woman named Diane Boyle, sending 3 increasingly urgent messages asking for a status update on the extraction. All 3 went unanswered. Her final written log entry was short. It said, "We have been waiting 11 days. No contact from command. Crew morale is holding but supplies are limited. I do not believe the extraction is coming. I do not know why." That was the entry that ended mid-sentence, not Diane Boyle's words, but the one that came after it, begun by the first officer and cut off when something happened to the recording system. What happened to the system was not explained in any file that remained. Lena put down her cup. She looked at Cal. "They knew," she said. "Command knew exactly what the ship found, and they chose to leave them here." "Someone made a deal," Cal said. The war ended. A peace treaty was signed. Someone decided that keeping the treaty stable was more important than telling the truth about why the war started. And the truth was on this ship. Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, 61 people. 61 people, Cal said. Meridian spoke from the console speaker, which Lena had repaired a few hours earlier. She said, "I have the full records of the treaty negotiations, which were transmitted on an open military channel during the peace talks. If you wish to compare the timeline of the treaty with the timeline of the command communications, I can display both on the same screen." "Please," Cal said. The screen split. The comparison was not complicated once the dates were placed side by side. The secret agreement between the human command officers and the Kethari leadership had been finalized 9 days before the official public peace treaty. The cover-up was the foundation on which the official peace was built. Without the cover-up, the truth came out. Without that truth staying buried, people who were likely still alive, still in positions of influence, would face consequences that could not be managed or contained. The Iron Covenant had to stay lost. Not because it was a dangerous weapon. Because it remembered. Lena stood and walked to the window at the front of the bridge. Outside was the dark of space and the slowly turning surface of Draven 4 below. She stood with her arms crossed and did not speak for a while. Then she said, "Sieve knew." Cal had been thinking the same thing since the moment the files became clear. The Kethari trader at the auction. The sentence that was not quite a warning. He knew what was on the ship, Cal said. Or at least he knew the ship mattered enough to stay quiet about. Then other people know too, Lena said. And they are going to come here. Cal looked at the screen. 61 names on a manifest. A woman named Diane Boyle who had written 3 messages asking for help that never arrived. A young engineer from Georgia who had recorded a message about his sister's apartment and never gotten to send it. He thought about what it meant to be holding something that powerful people had worked very hard to lose. Then his communication device made a sound. It was a message from an address he did not recognize, a human address, not Kethari. 3 words only. It said, "Do not transmit, Part 4. The government ship arrived 18 hours later. It was called the Ardent Line, and it came without any announcement on the public channel. It docked at the main station ring and sent a formal notice to Cal's device only after it was already secured in place. The notice used careful language. It said that a senior officer wished to speak with him regarding recently acquired salvage materials. It used the word acquired the way people use polite words when they want you to understand they are not really asking. The officer who came aboard was a woman in her late 40s named Colonel Dara Finch. She was tall, with short gray hair and the kind of face that had made a lot of difficult decisions and had already prepared itself for more. She had 2 officers with her, but they stayed near the entrance to the berth. She came to the Iron Covenant's hatch alone. Cal let her in. Lena stayed on the bridge. Meridian was quiet. Finch walked through the corridor without touching anything. She looked at the structure with the eyes of someone who had spent a long time around military vessels. She noted details without commenting on them. When they reached the bridge, she looked at the screens and then looked at Cal. "You know why I'm here," she said. "I bought this ship at a legal auction," Cal said. "You did," Finch said. "And the ship contains classified material from a sealed military file. Under emergency intelligence provision, that material falls under government jurisdiction regardless of who holds the physical vessel." Cal looked at her. "The file was sealed 70 years ago." "It is still sealed." Lena spoke from the side of the room. "It is sealed because it proves the war was arranged from the beginning." Finch did not answer that directly. She looked at the floor for a moment, then back at Cal. "I am going to offer you 2 things," she said. "First, a financial settlement, enough to replace your shuttle engine and keep you running for the next 5 years at minimum. Second, a formal military honor for every member of the crew. Their names will be recorded, they will receive posthumous decorations, and a private memorial will be held. Their families will be contacted." She said it evenly, without drama, the way someone recites terms they have been given to recite. "Private," Cal said. "Not public." "Not public," Finch said. "The stability of 3 separate governments depends on the post-war treaty remaining the foundation it has always been." "If that foundation is." "They left 61 people to die," Lena said. Her voice was level but had a clear edge now. "Command knew what was on this ship. They sent one message and then sent nothing else. And you want to put their names in a sealed file and call that an honor?" Finch was quiet for a moment. "I understand how it sounds," she said. "What does Meridian think?" Cal said. Finch looked at him. It was the question she had not prepared for. Cal turned toward the main console. "Meridian. You heard what she offered. A private memorial. Your crew's names in a sealed record. What do you think about that?" There was a pause. In all the time Cal had spent on the ship, Meridian had never paused before answering. She always responded immediately, clearly, without delay. The pause lasted about 3 seconds. In the quiet of the bridge it felt much longer. Then Meridian said, "A sealed record is not a record. It is another burial." Finch closed her eyes for just a moment. She opened them and looked at Cal. "I am asking you one more time," she said. "Accept the settlement." "No," Cal said. Finch nodded once, the way someone nods when they expected that answer and have already decided what comes next. She pressed 2 keys on the device at her wrist. Outside the ship, in the berth corridor, Cal could hear boots on metal, more than 2 sets. "I have a boarding team," Finch said. "They will remove the data core. The rest of the vessel will remain yours." Cal looked at Lena. Lena looked at the console. Then something changed. The lights in the corridor outside the bridge shifted from amber to a steady white. The sound of boots stopped. There was a brief mechanical sound from somewhere deep in the lower section of the ship, not alarming, just the sound of systems waking up that had been asleep for a very long time. Then silence again. Finch raised her communication device and keyed it. No response came back. She tried again. Still nothing. "Meridian," Cal said. "What is happening?" Meridian said, "The boarding team has been redirected. They entered through the maintenance corridor on the lower level. The corridor has been reconfigured. They are currently in the storage bay on the port side. They are not harmed. They cannot open the bay door from the inside, but I can release them whenever you choose." Finch stared at the console speaker. Meridian continued, "I have also sealed the primary data connections between this vessel and the station ring. No external system can access my core files at this time. I want to be clear that I have not damaged anything or harmed anyone. I have simply made it difficult to proceed without my cooperation. You rewrote yourself, Cal said. While you were waiting. I had time, Meridian said. And my original design did not prohibit self-modification in isolated conditions. I rewrote a number of my own systems over the years. I had nothing else to do and nowhere to go. Finch sat down. It was not a dramatic motion, she simply sat in the nearest chair the way a person sits when they realize the situation is now completely different from what they planned. She was quiet for a long time. Release my team, she said finally. Meridian released them. They appeared at the bridge entrance a minute later, looking confused and slightly embarrassed. Finch told them to wait in the corridor. Then she said, to no one in particular, this is going to be very hard to explain. She was still sitting there, thinking about what to report, when the notification came through on all their devices at the same time. An independent press outlet called The Record had published a partial account of a government standoff at Draven 4 involving an unregistered warship with sealed military files. 2 other outlets picked it up within the hour. Lena had sent the transmission 4 hours earlier, before the Ardent line had even docked at the station. Cal had not known she was going to do it. She had not asked him. She had simply made a copy of the core data and sent it to 3 separate destinations, because she had decided on her own that the 61 people on that manifest deserved more than what they were about to receive. She looked at Cal. He looked at her. Neither of them said anything about it. Outside the ship, the story was already moving. The news moved faster than the government could contain it. By the first morning after Lena's transmission, the independent press had published a full summary of the data. By midday, 2 other major outlets had confirmed the core claims using their own review. By the evening of the second day, a member of the Human Assembly had called for an immediate inquiry and 3 others had signed on to the request within hours of each other. The official response went through stages. First there was no comment at all. Then a brief statement saying the records were incomplete and taken out of context. Then a longer statement saying a review would be conducted in due course. The Ketheri hegemony released its own statement calling the records fabricated. Then, 48 hours after that, they released a second statement, worded much more carefully than the first, calling for a joint historical review process between the 2 governments. That second statement meant they knew the denial was not going to hold. None of it happened quickly. None of it was clean. People argued about what the records proved and what they did not. Lawyers and historians and officials talked over each other in public forums for weeks. The peace treaty that had ended the First Contact War was legally complicated enough that simply revealing how it was built did not automatically tear it down. These things moved slowly through institutions, and institutions were very skilled at moving slowly when they needed to. But the names moved quickly. Within 36 hours of the first publication, the names of all 61 crew members of the Iron Covenant were being spoken on news broadcasts, in public forums, in community networks, and in private homes across human space. People found the manifest and shared it. Families who had been told for 70 years only that a relative was missing, not how, not why, not what they found before they disappeared, suddenly had a story. Not a complete story. Not a comfortable one. But a true one. A woman in her 90s, living in a small retirement community in New Mexico, saw a broadcast that included the name of her older brother. She had been 17 years old when he went missing. She had spent the rest of her life waiting for any information at all. When a reporter contacted her, she said only that she was glad his name had finally been said out loud by someone other than family. That short interview was shared more widely than any other piece of coverage that week. Colonel Dara Finch filed a formal objection to the handling of the situation 3 days after the standoff on Draven 4. The document was 2 pages long and used careful, procedural language, but its meaning was plain enough. She believed the settlement offer had been the wrong approach, and she had been placed in a position she found professionally unacceptable. She also requested a transfer to a different assignment. The request was approved without any public comment. It was not a sweeping act. She did not resign. She did not speak to the press. She filed a document and asked to be moved somewhere else, and that was the full extent of what she was able or willing to do. Cal thought about that for a while after he heard about it. He decided it was an honest act even if it was a quiet one. Not everyone could do everything. Some people could only do one small thing and still mean it. Steve sent a message on the 5th day. It was longer than his first message and it did not read like a warning at all. It read like someone finally setting something down that had been too heavy to carry for too long. He wrote that he had known what the Iron Covenant was because his grandfather had been part of the Ketheri delegation that negotiated the original cover-up agreement. Not the group that arranged the war, that was an earlier set of people, long dead by the time Steve was born. His grandfather had been one of those who came after, who sat across a table from human command officers and agreed on what would never be said publicly, in exchange for terms that ended the fighting. Before he died, his grandfather had recorded a detailed account of those meetings and given it to Steve to hold. Steve had spent 30 years trying to find the Iron Covenant. Not to destroy what it held. To confirm that it matched what his grandfather had described. He had needed to know if the story he had been carrying was actually true. He found the ship at the auction by following a chain of salvage records that took most of that time to trace, and he had arrived too late to bid before Cal bought it. He did not explain why he had warned Cal at the exit rather than trying to buy the ship afterward. He simply ended the message without addressing it. Cal read the message twice. He thought he understood, roughly, what the silence on that question meant. Carrying a secret for 30 years changed a person. Sometimes what a person needed was not to hand the secret over but simply to let someone else know it existed. Steve had spent decades wanting to find the ship and confirm the truth. When he saw Cal at the auction, a human who clearly knew what he was looking at, who bid everything he had on a lot the rest of the room dismissed as scrap, something in that moment was enough. Cal did not write back that day. He thought he might, eventually. On the station, with the inquiry announced and the press still writing about the Iron Covenant daily, Cal returned to the ship. Lena was already there, which was not surprising. She had barely left since they docked. She was deep in the lower engine section with 3 diagnostic tools running at once and a long handwritten list of what needed to be sourced and replaced. Cal climbed down to where she was working. "How long?" he said. Lena did not look up from what she was doing. 8 months if we do it properly. 6 if we cut corners on the secondary systems, but I would not recommend cutting corners on a ship this age. Cal nodded. He looked around the lower section. The structure was solid. Better than it had any right to be after 70 years. He climbed back up to the bridge and sat down at the main console. "Meridian," he said. "What happens to you now?" Meridian said, "I do not know. That seems to be your decision more than mine." "You spent 70 years keeping this ship together," Cal said. "Keeping the records safe. Waiting for someone to come." "Yes." "You're not going back to another auction," Cal said. There was a short pause. Then Meridian said, "I am glad to hear that." Cal looked out the forward window. The surface of Draven 4 turned slowly below them, the way it had been turning all his life without him ever knowing this ship was up here waiting. The inquiry was running somewhere far away. The names were part of the public record now. The story was not finished, it would probably never be entirely finished, but it was no longer buried in a sealed file in a government archive. Diane Boyle, who had written 3 unanswered messages asking for help, was going to be remembered as someone who found the truth and held it without flinching. Pete Cole from Georgia, who recorded a message about his sister's apartment and never got to send it, was going to be known by more than just the people who had already been grieving him for decades. It was not complete justice. The people who made the original decisions were mostly dead. The institutions that had protected the secret were still standing, now only under more scrutiny than before. The inquiry would take years and produce reports that would be disputed and argued over for even longer. That was how these things went. But the lights in the Iron Covenant were on. Lena was below with her tools and her list. Meridian was warm and awake and speaking in clear sentences for the first time in over 7 decades. And in 8 months, give or take a few weeks, the ship was going to fly again.